Chapter 8, College Dropout. Kanye, can I talk to you for a minute? Think you could probably do something for the kids for graduation to sing? Intro, College Dropout. He bought his first keyboard when he was 14. He had saved nearly $500 toward it. With the $1,000 I gave him at Christmas, he had enough to purchase it. Maybe he knew then that it was music, not necessarily a college degree, that he was most interested in. I certainly didn't know that the keyboard would be his ticket out of college before graduation. I hadn't thought of a keyboard or music, period, as his path to success. Above all else, I certainly thought he'd get at least one degree. Dropping out of college like he did was not my choice. I always emphasized education from the time Kanye was 2 years old. I thought education was the best way to succeed. I knew Bill Gates and others hadn't finished college if they'd went at all, but they were the exceptions. Besides, I had that black middle class ethic that said you must go to school, do very well, and get at least one degree, and probably more. I never heard anyone say, "Oh, sure, I am mad I got this degree," even if they weren't using it. Perhaps I wouldn't have been so eager to contribute to him buying that keyboard if I had known that it would ultimately lead to Kanye dropping out of college. But that would have also been the biggest mistake of my life. I had no idea at the time that he was so incredibly gifted that he'd be able to cultivate and use that gift to acquire not only fame and fortune, but also true fulfillment. I knew he was good at art and music, but I never imagined him turning that into the career he has today. That was my limited thinking. If I had been thinking as big as he was, it would have been a no brainer. 4 years in college, or the opportunity to change the course of a whole genre of music and influence millions for the better in the process? Hmm. Who knew that Kanye West would become Kanye West? Apparently he did. After years of my pounding the education mantra into his head, Kanye proved me wrong. I still believe in education. School is great, and I still encourage it. The more degrees, the merrier, but only if you're going to use them. Use school. Don't let school use you, is one of Kanye's favorite sayings. Kanye has shown me the meaning of the phrase, there's more than one way to skin a cat. He purchased the keyboard, and soon he was able to acquire turntables and a mixer. Later, he added a drum machine with money he made working odd jobs. He had an entire studio in his room, at least the basics, along with a bed, a television, and a pile of clothes on the floor. Kanye dreamed of doing music from the time he was very young. I first noticed it when he was in the third grade. That and drawing were his passions. But somewhere along the way, music took over. Kanye spent hours and hours mixing, rapping, and writing. It was nonstop. He became so involved that his socializing revolved around that studio in his room. When his grandparents, Chick and Buddy, would visit, Kanye would come out of his room only to eat and go to the bathroom. He was amazingly focused. If anyone, including my dad, wanted to spend time with Kanye, they'd have to go to his room and get in a few words while Kanye made music. Daddy did that a number of times. He was fond of being with his grandchildren, mainly to learn from them and teach them what they'd probably not learn from the books. But if he was to teach Kanye anything besides what he taught him when we visited Oklahoma City at Christmas and for family reunions in the summer, he'd have to do so right in that bedroom studio where Kanye was preparing to be ready to drop out of college, if that's what it took to do music. There seemed to be a soundtrack playing perpetually in our home. It wasn't always pleasant for me. In fact, a lot of the time, it was nerve-wracking. That bumping bass line seemed to shake the very foundation of our house. Boom, 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 day and night. All I have to do is close my eyes and think about it for a moment, and I can still hear that bass ringing in my ears. By the time Kanye graduated from high school and had been out for a couple of years, I had had as much of the next perpetual hip hop right next to my bedroom as I could stand. I had listened to it for nearly 10 years and even offered my sometimes solicited opinion on the tracks he made. It was time for either his music or for him and his music to be somewhere else. Not that I was going to stop supporting his dream. We just have to find another place for him to follow it. I had considered turning my garage into a studio. I had even looked into the cost of soundproofing it, but it wasn't feasible. So the studio stayed in his room. There were all sorts of people coming in and out of the house. And since my room was before Kanye's, his music friends has to pass my bedroom to get to his. Most of the kids looked pretty wholesome, hip hop wholesome, that is. Mainly, it was the thundering bass that was no longer welcome. Not all day and all night, anyway. I finally had to say to Kanye, "You're moving." He was 20 years old and had announced that he wanted to drop out of college. He'd used flattery to convince me that his decision was a sound one. After all, he said, I've had the professor in my house my entire life. I'm now wondering if he came up with that line himself or if Rhymefest, Molly, John, or one of his other very clever friends had suggested he use that to win me over. Anyway, it worked, whoever came up with it. Yes, he did have the professor in the house all his life. Now, I suppose it was time for me to see what he had learned and what and learn that would bring him success without a college degree. I had preached marching to your own drummer and often didn't conform in my own life if I thought there was a better way. But I'd come from a family like so many other African American families, where getting your education was right next to believing in God. I'd even put a little money aside so he could go away to college if he wanted to. Florida A&M, Morehouse, I would have made it work. But here he was dropping out of school to do beats. I was not happy. My plan for him included his getting at least one degree, but that was my plan, not his. I believed in him and I believed he would be successful with his music, but I never imagined my child not completing college. Nevertheless, I was convinced that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Maybe next to the worst, but not the worst. I didn't really try hard to convince him to stay or say to him that he should have something to fall back on. From the time I was making my own decisions about what I'd major in and what profession I'd enter, I never thought of falling back. I was so convinced that the only option was to achieve whatever it was that I set out to do. It would be only natural if Kanye felt the same way. Never would I argue against having Plan B. But once you're truly sure of what you want in life, if you're passionate about it, and as well as talented and persistent enough to go after it, perhaps it's better to spend that falling back energy concentrating solely on getting what you want. All the same, I was right next to devastated when Kanye first put out his feelers about dropping out of school. If he had said directly, "Mom, I'm dropping out," that would not have been the best approach, and he knew it. It was much better to discuss it with me and bring me around to accepting the idea, although he probably knew for certain that he was going to do it when he first brought it up to me. Ultimately, I'm sure, he knew I would support him whatever path he chose as long as it was positive. It just took a little time for me to really grab hold of the concept that college was not for everybody, not for Bill Gates, the August Wilsons, or the Kanye Wests. At least he tried college for a couple of years. He had gone to the American Academy of Art in downtown Chicago on a partial scholarship the first semester after he finished high school. It was very competitive to get scholarships, and that he got even the partial scholarship for one semester made me very proud. The total cost per month without books, room and board, art supplies, or any of the other essentials was $1,100. I'd worked my way up from 17,000 annual salary when I started at Chicago State when he was 4 to somewhere in the $70,000 range. But the $550 I needed to pay each month for tuition along with the other expenses had me reaching back into that little nest egg I'd put away. Soon it would be depleted if he lived in downtown Chicago, stayed beyond the scholarship semester, and paid for everything else that was needed. I didn't mind. If being an artist was what he wanted to do, I would gladly have doubled that $550 a month I had paid while he was on scholarship and sprung for the whole 1100 a month the next semester. He stayed at home and the train fare from Tinley Park, where we lived at the time, was much less than $1,400 a month they wanted for the tiny little space in the dorms. He went for one semester, then told me, I don't want to be an artist. I knew then that although he went to his classes daily, had a portfolio that raised eyebrows, and really still loved the medium, he was much more interested in music. Fine, I said to myself. And then to him, you can go to Chicago State University. He'd still be in college, the tuition was already much cheaper, and I got a 50% discount as an employee. Chicago State it was. Kanye enrolled the very next semester. He finished that semester and didn't do too badly. He became an English major partly because he liked words, or at least he liked writing raps with them, and partly because he didn't have to stand in the long lines to get registered. I was chair of the English department. It was nothing for me to select the required courses, fill out his registration form, and sign it. No big deal, as long as he showed up for the classes and did his work. I didn't really mind saving him the drudgery of a system that was a little less than efficient. The second semester he was in Chicago State, his sophomore year, a couple of friends and colleagues reluctantly reported to me that Kanye was always either in the music rooms or the student union, not in the classroom. Walter, my good friend, Dr. Joyce's husband, worked in student affairs and was the first to pull my coat. Then Kanye's English teacher confessed that she wished he'd not been in her class. He was very smart and a good writer, but he didn't always do his work, nor always come to class. Thinking it might help, I ran to the office of the English advisor, Al Brown, and asked him to talk to Kanye. Anya, Al was young and with it. All the students liked him. The girls loved him because he was so tall and good looking. He'd actually been my student at Chicago State before graduating and going for a master's. I taught both Al and his twin sister, Alfreda. He'd be perfect to speak to Kanye. Al would make him see the light. He tried all right, but Kanye wasn't really going for it. And Al, seeing Kanye's passion and his drive to do something other than get a degree in English, was wise enough to not really press the issue. Desperate by this time, I found ways to encourage Kanye to go to class and take advantage of this opportunity to earn at least one degree. I talked to several people. One of them was Robin Binney, the director of our composition program. I think she had a conversation or two with Kanye and saw that his alternative just might be a good one. I was surprised when she spoke to me on Kanye's behalf. Here she was, an educator just like me, encouraging me to realize that Kanye didn't necessarily have to complete college, at least not right then, to do something big in the world. She saw what I did not see at the time, a young man who had other ideas and expressed them very well, an artist with passion who felt another path would serve him better. I appreciated Robin's point of view, and technically I even agreed with her. But it's one thing to agree with someone philosophically, and quite another to feel good about the inevitable. Your one and only child dropping out of school. Well, it happened that semester. His third semester of college life. Kanye dropped out and never looked back. We made a deal. He'd have 1 year to make it happen. He would continue to live at home, but because he wasn't in college and pursuing what, in my mind, was the wisest plan, I would charge him $200 a month for rent. It wasn't that I needed the money, and it wasn't punishment for not going to school. I simply wanted to instill in Kanye the responsibilities that came with manhood. To me, if you'd finished high school and chosen not to go to college, then you'd chosen a path that brought with it a financial responsibility. Kanye would need to earn enough money to pay that rent on time every month. That was part of showing me he could make it work. He got a job working as a busboy in a Bob Evans restaurant. But when he reported for work, he decided immediately that bussing tables was not something that would work for him. He quit on his first day before he even started. I would have to be another kind of it would have to be another kind of job for him. He'd never worked at McDonald's, Burger King, or any other food places. A restaurant was not going to work. Kanye did have the gift of gab, so he landed several jobs in telemarketing and did quite well at all of them. His first such job wasn't long lived. One reason was that he was not allowed to doodle while he talked on the phone, but the main reason is that the supervisor insisted on pronouncing his name wrong. Kanye told her several times it was pronounced Kanye with a long A, but she seemed to screw it up on purpose and would say Kanye, Kanya, whatever your name is. This angered him to no end. So one day, without even giving it a second thought, he decided to quit. I couldn't believe it. His dad had bought him a new car. It was a small, inexpensive, but new and sporty looking just the same. He had to maintain it and put gas in it. My contribution was paying the insurance, and that was considerable for a male under the age of 25 who didn't have the best driving record in the world. Kanye, I said, halfway between calm and irate, you'll have to go back in there and get that job back until you can find another. He didn't like that, but he didn't really argue, and he even went back in and got his job back. Maybe he didn't, maybe he hadn't told them he was quitting, now that I think about it. But after another paycheck or two, he landed another telemarketing position. This one he liked much better. He could draw while he was on the phone, and nobody cared as long as he was productive. He made a lot of sales, enough to get a few bonus checks. He was so good that one day he called me, and I swear I didn't even know it was Kanye. I just thought it was a telemarketer. I knew I had no interest in buying whatever was being sold. Actually, I hated those telemarketing calls. It was nothing to hang up on them. But since Kanye had become one of those telemarketers, I had started listening patiently and kindly, declining whatever the offer was. Just as I was about to interrupt politely and tell the young man thanks but no thanks, Kanye told me it was him. Kanye was making enough money to pay his rent and buy gas, fast food, and an outfit or two. But the problem was that Leonard, Warren, and a whole host of other kids, as I called them, and still do, were trotting by my door nightly on their way to Kanye's room. If my door was open, they'd stick their heads in, just as polite as could be, and say with a smile, "Hello, Miss West." They were all charmers, especially that Leonard, and I loved all the ones I knew. But that didn't make it any better. The bass was still booming, and as I mentioned before, I had had enough, more than enough. That music and traffic were too much. They would all have to go. It's either you or your music, I told him. You'll need to move out or find a studio away from the house. You can stay, but all of this music and these people have to go. Mom, are you kicking me out? He couldn't believe it, but he knew I meant business. I rarely had to raise my voice or get the least bit ugly for Kanye to know when I was dead serious. And he also understood my point totally. Well, wouldn't you know it, Kanye had been working with this young man called Gravity, and Gravity landed a record deal. He bought beats from Kanye to the tune of $8,000. I knew then that Kanye was going to make it. It's not that I had doubted it, but now I wouldn't just need to go on faith. Surely $8,000 wasn't all the money in the world, or even enough to support him very long. It was the principle. I saw him making it work. It reminded me of when he'd had all his cousins in the mall in Oklahoma City one summer selling his first mixtape. With their help, he'd made it work. And when he got that deal for 8,000, I knew that millions weren't far behind. Shortly after that, we found him an apartment in the Beverly section of Chicago. It was a spacious two-bedroom apartment over a dress shop. It had a huge living room and dining room, and there was even a small room that he used for a studio. It was a perfect space for him. The rent was $1,000 a month. The landlord was a little reluctant at first because Kanye was such a young man. I told the man that my son was very responsible, and if there was any problem, I would be there to take care of it. I always pulled for Kanye. I would help him get anything he wanted. I certainly was going to pull for him if it meant getting that music out of my house. He got the place, but the guy didn't like the traffic the music was attracting. It was in a commercial area, and there was one other tenant who was hardly there. She never really complained. The landlord just wanted Kanye out. That was his right, I suppose. It was his building. Besides, the lease would have ended sooner or later, and it probably worked out to be a blessing in disguise. It was perfect timing for Kanye to leave the city he had grown to love so much. And I got evicted, packed all my shit up in a U-Haul. Kanye, last call, college dropout. Kanye, proud college dropout, decided he was going off to the Big Apple, where it was all happening. Before deciding on New York, though, he considered another hip hop hotspot, Atlanta. Jermaine Dupri was there, and Kanye thought perhaps he could go find success there, too. He felt he had outgrown Chicago. There was just nothing big enough popping off for him there. It was his home, though, and I believe he would have stayed if he could have made it big. So we went to Atlanta, even found an apartment and put a down payment on it. But New York was calling. I had a friend, Richard Johnson, who lived in New Jersey. We'd heard lots of people lived there and worked in New York. It was settled. New Jersey would be a better and more affordable place for Kanye to settle while he was trying to take off in the music business. Richard found him this beautiful one-bedroom apartment in Newark, right across from Penn Station. We rented it, sight unseen. It was $850 a month with a living room and a step-up great room with a glass ceiling. You could actually look up and see the sky. It was wonderful, and Kanye was inspired. He said he knew he could make good music there, and I was pleased, just as long as Kanye was happy. The only thing that was not happening was the carpet. A couple of cats had occupied the place before Kanye got there and had not always made it to the litter pan. We snatched that up and had Home Depot come and lay some new carpet right away. Kanye loved that place. He called up his friends and said, "Man, you should see this place. It's like something off of TV." Kanye was exactly where he wanted to be. He was on his way to fulfilling his dream.